talking to Cornelius. Conversation 22. There was always a political dimension to life on the goldfields. It was there long before the Eureka Stockade in Ballarat in 1854. The desire of diggers was about more than just financial gain. All the language of the new aristocracy, and Jack being as good as his master, expressed a desire for a new society that was no longer burdened by the class structure and presumptions of the old world. This was the beginning of the great Australian egalitarian dream, a dream that's still a long way from being fully realised. The licence fee for prospecting was a particularly jarring point in the midst of all that social aspiration and talk of equality. The first Lieutenant Governor of Victoria, Charles Joseph La Trobe, more commonly known as Charlie Joe, soon found out how politically charged that licence fee could be. He decided to double the fee on the 8th of December, 1851. His representatives, known as Joes, would then hunt down those without licences with a brute vigour. The increased licence fee was yet another example of a powerful, entitled elite suppressing the aspirations of the workers. It was read as a political act to enforce a class-based status quo. The news reached Forest Creek, and the following message was soon posted around the diggings. Fellow diggers, the intelligence has just arrived of the resolution of the government to double the licence fee. Will you tamely submit to the imposition, or assert your rights as men? You are called upon to pay a tax originated and concocted by the most heartless selfishness, a tax imposed by legislators for the purpose of detaining you in their workshops, in their stable yards, and by their flocks and herds. They have conferred to effect this. They would increase this sevenfold, but they're afraid. Fie to them, and shame upon the men who, to save a few paltry pounds of their own pockets, would tax the poor man's hands. It'll be in vain for one or two individuals to tell the Commissioner or his emissaries that they have been unsuccessful and that they cannot pay the licence fee. But remember that union is strength, that though a single twig may be bent or broken, a bundle of them tied together yields not nor breaks. Ye are Britons. Will you submit to oppression or injustice? Meet, agitate, be unanimous, and if there is justice in the land, they must abolish the imposition. Yours faithfully, a digger. This is one of the earliest expressions of working class protest in Australian history. The voice is passionate, proud, and unhesitating in challenging the self-serving priorities of the authorities of the day. There's no doubt the letter, nailed to trees and handed out around Forest Creek, stimulated a great amount of conversation among the diggers. Ultimately, the call to meet and agitate resulted in a monster meeting on the 15th of December, 1851, which was attended by between 12,000 and 20,000 people. It was the largest gathering of its kind up to that point in Australian colonial history, and it caused sufficient shockwaves to lead La Trobe to retreat from raising the licence fee. It's a strange thing, old man, that most of us are ignorant about this first victorious moment in the history of the Australian working classes. Our knowledge of the gold rush largely begins and ends with the Eureka Stockade, and so we lose a wealth of historic knowledge as a consequence, but more importantly, we lose a fuller sense of where we have come from and how we have been shaped as a people. I'm mindful of you, old man, in the midst of all of this. I'm not clear when you made the change from being a digger at Forest Creek to being a carter. I've tended to presume you made the change before you were married, but there's no great basis for that presumption. I see your decision as a smart strategic move for a man in his late 20s. You were able to step back from the addictive idea that if you only stayed in the diggings long enough, you would surely strike your fortune. Many a man grew old and stayed poor, chasing that dream of a lucky strike from one goldfield to another. There was a generous regular income in the business of carting goods from Melbourne to the goldfields, but it wasn't a business for the faint-hearted. The journey up Flemington Road and out of Melbourne led into a world of vulnerability. The roads to the various goldfields, Mount Alexander and Bendigo and Ballarat, were no more than bush tracks. Axles became bogged when it rained. Summer heat burnt pale European skin. Poorly hobbled horses escaped overnight. Passengers could prove a headache. Grog was a complicating temptation, and bushrangers could cut your throat when you least expected it. The journey from Melbourne to Mount Alexander roughly followed the direction of today's Calder Freeway. A good first day out of Melbourne could see you stopping at the aptly named Diggers' Rest on the Keilor Plains. There you would tend the horses, light a fire, boil the billy, eat a meal, have a final look out over the flat expanse as day turned to night, then climb up and sleep under a tarp on top of your dray. Some carters travelled with their wives. Their home was out there on the track. I wonder if that was the case with you and Bridget, or did she stay back in Melbourne while you travelled? I don't know how well you slept with the dangers of the night, old man. The road to the Victorian goldfields was as Wild West as anywhere in America. I suspect being an ex-convict might have helped when you cross paths with a gang. Most bushrangers had done their time in Van Diemen's Land. A quick conversation with you could soon uncover a common background and a shared view of the establishment and its constabulary. Having a story to tell about taking a pompous magistrate to the Supreme Court itself may well have been the winning hand with bushrangers. I could see them having a laugh that you pulled off such an outrageous thing, and shaking their heads at the paltry payout you received before sending you on your way. To the editor of the Argus, Diggers' Rest Inn, Keilor Plains, October 19, 1852. Sir, at about 5 o'clock this evening, information came to me by parties who had been robbed within a mile of my place of the bushrangers sticking them up and several others, and believing in my own mind 4 men were able to take 4 men, inasmuch as it is generally supposed an honest man has by far more confidence than a rogue, I proposed to follow them myself, making one, if 3 other gentlemen, extensive storekeepers at the diggings being in my house, would accompany me. All agreed, each equipped with a brace of pistols. Individual after individual within the space of 3 miles had their pockets ransacked of gold or money by these detestable and audacious villains. At length we overtook them about 3.5 miles from the diggers' rest-in. At first sight they appeared to be inclined to escape from us, as they commenced galloping at full speed. But in less than 5 minutes they turned around upon us, presenting each a double-barrelled gun just within gunshot of us, a distance our pistols could not carry, commanding us at the same time to dismount. For my own part, I was inclined to give a chance shot. Had I done so, I have not the slightest doubt. Fearful would have been the result. Seeing we had not the slightest chance of standing against pieces so formidable compared to ours, I first started my horse over the plains towards Mr. Aitken's, and hoping to be followed by one of them, in order to have what I have long desired, an opportunity to rid this part of the country of one of the most daring of bushrangers. I had no sooner started than the order was given, "Follow him," which was instantly obeyed. I was followed by one of the fastest hacks probably in the colony, for at least 1.5 miles, the bushranger being within gunshot all the way. At length he fired, but without effect, still keeping after me for a short time only, which I suppose was to impress upon my mind he had another charge, when he turned round, galloping towards his party and my friends whom I had left. I, in like manner, chasing him, having the satisfaction of discharging my pistol within 40 yards of him, but likewise without effect. I emptied my pockets of all I possessed before I started in pursuit. But my companions went, one with £520, another with £230, and the other with both watch and cash. The first gentleman started after me in another direction, having 2 shots fired at him, was robbed of all he had in consequence of his returning 2 different times back to them, and not having presence of mind to secrete his money in the bush. I must say, that gentleman, whose name in another communication will be made known, is one of the bravest men I ever met with. Unfortunately, they severely beat him withal. The man who had the £250 came off uninjured and without loss. The other lost all he had, and his favourite horse shot under him. I've sent to Mr. John Aitken, begging that he will immediately communicate with Mr. Powlett at Gisborne, and likewise forwarded intelligence to the police office, Melbourne, by the men who were robbed. We have every reason to believe one is the notorious fellow who escaped from Pentridge some time ago, then under sentence for a similar offence. Your favour of the insertion of the above will oblige. Sir, yours respectfully, Thomas Gregory. The Argus, Melbourne, 22nd of October, 1852.